Hi, I'm David DeSteno, author of How God Works, the science behind the benefits of religion. And I want to thank the Boulder Bookstore for sending me some questions and allowing me to share my answers with you today. The first question they asked was, what inspired me to write this book? And as a scientist, it might seem a little strange that I'm writing a book about religion. But it's really not about religion in the sense of does God exist or what beliefs should we hold. It's more about religion as a practice. The one thing we know, if you look at the data, is that people who regularly engage in spiritual practices live longer, healthier, and happier lives. And the question I have is, why? How do they go about doing that? And so in this book, I look at rituals and spiritual practices, things like prayer, meditation, psychedelic use, even firewalking, from a scientific perspective, to understand how all the things that different religions do to help us meet the challenges of life, from bonding with our children to becoming more ethical, to dealing with health crises, to making transitions to different phases of life, to loss, and eventually facing our own death. And in looking at those, I examine how these practices leverage parts of our bodies and minds in ways that nudge us toward better types of outcomes. The second question is, what kind of research did you do while writing this book? Well, as a psychologist, most of my research is done in my lab, and I've been doing that for about 30 years, studying how people form connection, what leads to better character, how they become more resilient and find meaning in life. And so as I was doing that for the past 30 years, what became clear to me over time is that a lot of the things I was finding were being used by religion already. And so I decided that maybe there's more for me as an individual and for science as a field in general to learn from looking at religious practices. We all know now that meditation has benefits for people, but its original purpose wasn't to make you feel less stressed or to improve your standardized test scores. Those didn't exist. Its original purpose was to make people more compassionate to themselves and others, to reduce suffering of all sentient beings in the world. And so when we studied meditation in my lab, what we found was that after only a few weeks of practice, people became kinder. We would send actors out in front of them who looked like they were in pain and needed help. And we would see by threefold the number of people who had engaged in a few weeks of meditation versus those who we assigned to be on a waiting list would suddenly spontaneously go to help these people. And so my goal here is to take that research that I've been doing in my lab and to see what else is out there. Because meditation, mindfulness can't be the only spiritual practice that has some true real-world benefits that we can measure. My question is, what's the next mindfulness? It's out there if we're willing to look. And so the research that I did for this book in particular, as opposed to my daily research grind over 30 years studying human behavior, was to look at rituals for all phases of life from across the world. So I grew up Catholic, and I knew those by virtue of how I was raised. But I spent time learning about Shinto rituals for birth and childhood, Jewish rituals for mourning, Hindu rituals for changes at midlife, Buddhist methods of meditation, Islamic birth rituals and views on the importance of giving and service, and even indigenous cultures, rituals involving psychedelic use like ayahuasca and psilocybin. And to me, that was an amazing experience because suddenly as I began to look at these rituals, what I began to see was the way that they packaged together amazing little psychological nudges. What was the most surprising thing I learned while writing this book? Um, Probably that people thousands of years ago intuited what we psychologists are figuring out today. And sure, in the past, people didn't have, they couldn't do brain scans, they couldn't do randomized control trials, but they intuited things that worked. Let me give you a great example. One common challenge that we all face in life is when someone we love passes and we experience grief and mourning. And you don't want to deny grief. It's a natural part of life. But the trick is to move through it in a way where it doesn't go on too long and it doesn't become too intense such that it's paralyzing. And if you think about this, what's something all religions do? Well, they all engage in eulogizing, right? We all spend time talking about what was wonderful about the person who passed. And that seems kind of normal. But if you think about it, it's kind of strange, right? If I just lost an award that I thought I was going to get, or my significant other dumped me, I wouldn't want to spend time thinking about how great that award or that significant other was. It would hurt all the more. Yet when someone passes, we spend time trying to create a very positive image of them, and it doesn't make it hurt more. In fact, research by George Bonanno at Columbia University, one of the nation's leading grief and resilience researchers, shows that it reduces grief. It's people who can form positive memories of those who have passed, who show less grief. It's those who can't that tend to be more depressed and show greater anxiety and grief. But if you look at religious rituals like Shiva, the Jewish mourning practice, it packages even so much more together, right? When someone passes in Judaism, it is a mitzvot. It is a sacred obligation for others to go and visit the people the mourners, to bring them food, to help in other ways. This is what's called instrumental support. It's not following somebody on Facebook. It's showing up when you need them. And it's one of the biggest predictors for increased resilience in the face of grief. And sure, when people pass, all of us might do this once or twice. But in Judaism, for 7 days, and in some cases beyond that, it is ritualized. People must do this. And when they're there, they form groups that are called minyans, which are 10 or more people who will pray together. When they pray together, they will pray together. Oftentimes they will sway together. They will chant together. That induces something called motor synchrony, something we've studied in my lab. Simply moving together in time with someone increases feelings of connection and compassion. Then there are other elements that seem rather subtle, but are brilliant. So in Shiva, as well as in Irish wakes and other Hindu mourning ceremonies, people will cover mirrors. And you might say, well, okay, that seems kind of strange, but it has a deep psychological impact. There's psychological research showing that whatever emotional state you're feeling, when you look into a mirror, it will intensify. And so at times of grief, if you look at yourself in the mirror, you will feel more grief. Covering mirrors is the way to reduce that. There's also a custom in Shiva where people sit either on the floor or on very low stools, something that, in terms of your body's ergonomics, will cause discomfort pretty rapidly, discomfort that's relieved when you get up to welcome somebody coming into your house. There's new neuroscience research that shows mild onsets and offsets of discomfort actually reduce grief and rumination. So again, it's something else that's built into the practice that functions to reduce the grief we're feeling. All of these rituals use not only belief, but techniques that alter our physiology and affect our mind in ways that fly under our conscious radar. And it's in exploring those, I think, that we scientists can learn how to give advice, how to give suggestions to other people for things to do. It's not in terms of cultural appropriation. It's not appropriate to take the symbols and the exact words of the prayers. But if we look at how things in these rituals are leveraging physiology by body positions, interaction techniques, etc., that is something that, just like we're seeing with meditation, can be extracted as a tool to help us all, even in secular ways. Did I participate in any of the religious rituals I write about and experience firsthand their benefits? Yeah, one of the big ones that I try to do now is involves gratitude experiences. So every religion has prayers of gratitude. What does that do? Well, in my lab, what we've shown is that when people count their blessings, whether they're grateful to their parents, their friends, or to God, what we see is a change in their character. Suddenly, they will cheat less. They will become more ethical. We'll give them opportunities where they can flip a coin and tell us if it's heads or tails. Heads, they win more money than they do if it's tails, and they think they're doing it anonymously, but they're not. And so whereas, people will cheat about 53% of the time on average, if you're feeling grateful, it drops down to around 25%, less than half. And so it also makes people more generous, more helpful. And it makes us not only pay back people to whom we're grateful, but pay it forward. And so religions the world over have been using this as a practice to not only tell people what's the right thing to do, but to give us the tools to do it by regularly, every day, cultivating gratitude. And so every day I try to find some way to reflect on things that I'm grateful for. And the trick is, right, not to reflect on the same 5 things that you're the most grateful for, because you'll get used to them over time. You'll habituate to them. Rather, do it for simple things that happened to you that day or the day before. Someone gave you directions when you were lost. Someone held a door for you. Someone helped you out with a project at work. There's a wonderful practice in Judaism where the first thing people do in the morning is say a prayer called the Moda'ani, which is a thank you. Thank you for letting me be here again today, for wake from my sleep. That's something that any of us can do, irrespective of our faith. Just be thankful that we have another day here to do some good in the world. What is one religious practice or ritual that I think everyone should do, regardless of their religious beliefs? Well, that's one right there. Expressing gratitude every day will build in you generosity, kindness, increased honesty. It's definitely a good one to do. Meditation is also another good one to do. From our own work, as I've said, it will just make you spontaneously more kind. We've also done work where we show that meditation makes people less reactive to provocation. So when people insult you, you are less likely to lash out. And whether that's your boss or your Twitter feed, that may be helpful to you as well. What have I been reading during the pandemic to stay inspired? Well, to be honest, for much of the pandemic, I was writing this book and researching those religious rituals. So that's kind of what I was reading and doing. But now it's instead of focusing on larger books, I'm tending to look for daily articles that describe the good that's happening in the world to balance out the statistics that we're seeing of fires, of deaths, of COVID spread, whatever it may be. Not to close my eyes, because it's important to know that people are suffering in the world, to do something about it. But it's those stories of hope and examples of people acting in ways to remedy those actions and to remedy those problems that gives us the sense that we too can do something. That even a little action that I might do, when combined with little actions that somebody else is doing, add up to help us all. Is there anything else that I want you to know about my book? Yeah, and that is, it is open to believers and non-believers. Whatever your view is, you are welcome here. As I say in the book, we all have to we're all entitled to our isms, but we need to put them aside for a minute, right? And atheism is an ism just as much as is Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism. Atheism, too, is a belief that relies on faith. There is no test for the fingerprint of God. Atheism is a belief that probability favored us in this corner of the universe, which may well be true or not. I don't know. And any scientist can't tell you with 100% proof that God exists or God doesn't exist. So let's not argue about that. What scientists and religious leaders care about is making life better for people. And so let's look at these practices and rituals. And whether you believe they had divine inspiration to them, or whether you believe they resulted from people figuring stuff out and honing these rituals and practices over millennia, is up to you. But we don't have to agree on where a technology came from. We don't have to know where a technology came from to use it, right? I use my iPhone every day. I don't know how it was developed, but it lets me connect to folks around the world. And so I think what we can do is look at these religious practices and find out how they help people live happier, healthier lives. See what knowledge we can take from that and incorporate it into our own lives. Great. And now I'd like to read you a short passage from my book. And I'm going to start with the introduction because in some ways I think that lays out everything that's going to come. How do you raise a child to be a good person? What are your responsibilities to your family, your friends, and your community? How do you cope with a serious illness? Can you find someone to love? And if you do, how do you go on when they're gone? How do you find joy and meaning in life, especially in difficult times? And how do you make sense of your own life's inevitable end? These are the questions that keep people up at night. They strike at the heart of what it means to be human. And so they keep me up at night too. Not only because I'm trying to figure out, like millions of others, how to live a good life, but also because for the past 30 years, my career is focused on uncovering ways to help people become more moral, more compassionate, and more resilient as they walk the road of life. That might be surprising, as I'm not a priest, therapist, or life coach. I'm a research scientist. I conduct psychological experiments, and few people would expect to find the meaning of life through scientific investigation and lab work. For millennia, people have turned to priests, ministers, rabbis, and imams to help them deal with grief and loss, birth and death, morality and meaning. And many still turn to a traditional faith or seek out new modes of spirituality to address the challenges and opportunities that life presents. But over the past few decades, science has started finding ways to help people deal with these issues too. Psychologists like me study things like generosity, empathy, resilience, and forgiveness. And as scientists learn more about what helps foster these feelings and behaviors, we can also suggest practical steps that people can take to improve their lives. This data-driven approach may seem at odds with religion. Indeed, even though I was raised Catholic, for most of my adult life, I didn't pay religion much heed. Like many scientists, I assumed it was irrelevant to my work. Yet over the years, as I continued to scientifically study the questions that fascinated me, questions about how to improve the human condition, I was surprised that many of the answers I found aligned with religious ideas. Even more surprising to me was that certain aspects of religious practices, even when removed from their spiritual settings, had a profound impact on people's minds. My research team found, for example, that giving thanks to one person, or to God, made people more honest and generous to others, not only to those they cared about, but also to strangers. We saw that just a few weeks of meditation made people more compassionate, more willing to jump out of their seats to aid others in pain, and to resist lashing out at people who might otherwise provoke them to violence. To our surprise, we found that even basic parts of many religious rituals, like moving or singing together, made people feel more connected and committed to one another. Other researchers have discovered that religious practices can lessen anxiety, reduce depression, and even increase physical health. In fact, much of what psychologists and neuroscientists were finding out about how to change people's beliefs, feelings, and behaviors, how to support them when they grieve, how to help them find connection and happiness, seemed to echo ideas and techniques that religions have been using for thousands of years. To my growing curiosity, I realized that we scientists were discovering many things that others had realized and implemented long ago. That's when it dawned on me. We were going about this in the wrong way. I realized that the surprise my colleagues and I felt when we saw evidence of religion's benefits was a sign of our hubris, born of a common notion among scientists. All of religion was superstition, and therefore could have little practical benefit. Yet as I learned, and as this book shows, spiritual leaders often understood, in ways that we can now scientifically confirm, how to help people live better lives. Social scientists are the new kids on the block. Thanks. And thanks for sharing your afternoon or evening with me. And thanks to Boulder Bookstore for inviting me.